Had the vacation last week.
John isn't on the committee. He's staff. He's not. That's it.
Spring training.
No, we went to Barbados instead this year, so.
That sounds pretty good.
I missed a cricket tournament actually that they had there. They were having one on Sunday. And I guess it's pretty big sport there, but I don't know, I've never got it, I've never.
All right, we're going to call the meeting of our Priorities Committee to order. This is March 5th, 2024. Before we get into any business or explanation, we will call the roll, and Alderwoman Klee has agreed to be the clerk of the committee. Thank you very much. So, Alderwoman Klee, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Director Photo?
Present.
Director Sullivan?
Present.
Director Cummings?
Present.
Alderman Gouveia?
Here.
Alderman Clemens?
Here.
Alderman O'Brien? Alderman Wilshire?
Here.
Alderman Klee is here, and Mr. Mayor?
I'm here.
Okay.
So just as a couple of items at the beginning, as you've heard already, and John, the CFO Griffin, is going to get into the details, but he believes that we can only afford to borrow or bond at a maximum $30 million a year for each of the next 5 years. That will actually increase the bond and indebtedness budget, so that is certainly the ceiling that CFO Griffin believes we can afford, and he will present you the details. And then you will also see later on this project list, which totals $250 to $300 million, depending on what numbers you put on these things, indicating that clearly we can't afford all of the projects that are on the agenda or that are being sought. And beyond that, we've committed, and you'll see this from the plan that Mr. Griffin's going to propose or put forward. We have already committed this year, in year one of the 5 years, $28,450,000 between the elementary schools and the Walnut Street Oval and the middle school contingency. And there's money committed for next year as well. So the purpose here is to try to talk through these projects and decide in what priority they should be undertaken and their relative importance. I was hoping to schedule the meeting in 208 or in the auditorium to try to encourage what I hope the approach is, which is a discussion and consensus building exercise rather than there was this goal, we're going to have 5 to 4 votes and all this. Well, hopefully that could happen, but maybe not. I thought those rooms were a little more conducive, but we could not book them because they were already taken. But hopefully we can proceed on a sort of exchange of ideas and consensus basis, because all of these projects are worth doing. The question is which ones come to the forefront when we can only afford to do some of them. And with that, I think I will turn it over to CFO Griffin to begin the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the committee, and other participants. John Griffin, CFO, Treasurer, Tax Collector. Today, I'd like to review with you some exhibits that I've shared with the Budget Review Committee the last 2 years, particularly a forecast of debt service for our general fund bonds. We're not dealing at this point with paving bonds, TIF-related bonds, wastewater bonds, or solid waste bonds. So this is strictly general fund bonding that we review annually and make recommendations to the mayor and the Budget Review Committee, and eventually decide what to do, what to bond, what to fund. And the purpose of this, from my perspective, is we have limited bonding capability from the standpoint of affordable tax rate.
We do have enough room in our debt limits, but we, as we generally say, the debt limits, although they're pretty good, they 2% on the city side and 6% on the school side. You wouldn't want to approach those because that would be a lot of bonding. So with regard to this exercise, I have passed out a 3-page exhibit. One is the title of the exhibits, and that will go to the legislative manager. And if we focus on the second one, we use Hilltop Securities as a financial advisor, and they help guide us on not only the structures of the bonds when we sell them, but also potential interest rates. And you'll notice at the top of this particular agenda, this particular exhibit, we are still using rather high bonding rates.
All right, can we interrupt for a moment?
Sure,
So,
go ahead.
let's,
Alderman O'Brien.
we need to record Alderman O'Brien as present.
Yay. Okay,
Good to
so we're
see you.
using 4.5% to 5% interest rates. Hopefully, the interest rates will moderate as the Fed takes its steps through this fiscal year and next fiscal year. So to get into what we're trying to show here is this is referred to as Financing Plan 22A, which is actually, hold on here. $150 million over 5 years, equal principal, with the exception of the $10 million middle school, which we sold on a 25-year basis for the previous $118 million at level debt. So if we look at the fiscal year on the left-hand side and plan for fiscal '25, we start with the existing debt, which includes all bonded sales through through last year. We have 20 million, roughly 20.5 million of bonded debt, which comes over to fiscal '25 on the far right. That's going to be about $1 million more than fiscal '24.
I'm sorry, how much, John?
About $1 million more than '24. And the purpose of this exercise is to take our existing general fund debt, add to it the 530 millions at the interest rate that's shown, actually at 4%. I was using the wrong exhibit, but 4% is what we're hoping for as a steady interest rate. We actually like it to be less, but the debt service kicks in the following year after the debt is sold. So next year, fiscal '26, there'll be some reduction in the debt service, which is 26 minus 25 in the left-hand column, but we're adding the 2.8, so if you go over to the far right, these columns all add together. There will be a slight increase in the debt service. Following year, another 30 million, the ensuing year, 30 million. When we sell these bonds, usually in September, October of any given year, the first payments kick in the following fiscal year. So the fiscal '25 bond sale we're going to have in the fall, those payments will begin to be made in fiscal '26. So in sharing this exhibit with the mayor and Director Sullivan, Director Cummings, if we look at 2030, we're growing the debt service to roughly 30 million. So we're going to have increases, the mayor indicated, we're going to have increases every year if we go with this plan. Now, this assumes 5 years of sales, so you have to be careful and kind of stop at 2030, because if we sell debt in year 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, this is just going to increase going forward. So although it looks like we are extinguishing debt on the left-hand side, we don't have any columns for fiscal year for sale on 9/1/29, et cetera. So what this tells me is that, and I've kind of talked about this at the May 5th, 2022 budget meeting and the June 1st, 2023 budget meeting, is that we're getting into a situation where we're adding more debt than we're extinguishing. So, as the mayor has indicated, and I've indicated over the past several years, we're paying off a lot of debt, which is good. It's roughly 10 million a year, and then the other 10 million is the interest. But, so that 30 million seems to be a reasonable number in the sense that it's gonna be less than 10% of the total general fund budget, and I kind of indicated that in the years that we were coming out of, we were less than the 10%, but it's not an exorbitant amount to fund. And as we climb through the years, there's no year that's 2.5 more than the previous year, and as you know, the 2.5 million increase in any given year is 1% on the tax rate. The other piece of information, I didn't bring that exhibit, but if we spend 40 million every year, that 30 million is gonna be 37 million. That seemed to be a little bit too much from the standpoint of 37 million in year 2030 minus 20 million in 2025. That seems like a tremendous increase. 17 million divided by 5 is more than even 1% on the tax rate. So although our needs are plenty, we have to have some fiscal conservatism here going forward. So with that, I'd like to pause it briefly, and if anybody has any questions on the design of this particular exhibit, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this point.
Now, we should have acknowledged at the beginning that Alderman Dowd is here as well as those, or did we call him?
I didn't call him, but I did put him on the sheet here.
Okay. Anyway, any questions? Anybody? Comments? Alderman Dowd.
You know, we had always talked about having the debt service number fall in a range. And I know that you used to be able to manipulate the bonds to stay within that range. And I know that what you're talking about now is going outside that range. But do we have that range indicated anywhere on a graph, or, and so when we're determining what needs to get done, we can stay within that range?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Alderman Dowd, the range, we were able to accommodate that range in my first 10 years here, where inflation was pretty close to 1 or 2%. What our financial advisors say, you can kind of defer principal. Treasurer Fredette and I use that strategy in times of low inflation rates. It's not a good idea when inflation rates are 4 or 5%, because it's going to be very expensive from an interest rate perspective. So this is modeled with level principal. So if you have a $20 million bond, it's 20-year bonds, $1 million a year plus the interest. So it's going to be more expensive in the first years, less expensive. We use some of those techniques. One in particular was the Broad Street Parkway bonds. We deferred principal because the interest rates were between 1 and 2%. So although you know very well that we used to have targets, the targets are really meaningless in the sense that the target that I'm recommending is no more than $30 million of bonding in each year. Treasurer Fredette used to have, 17 million, 17.5, 8. When you add debt at a more rapid pace than what you're paying off, it's impossible to have those targets. So I would say that the targets are in the far right-hand corner of this exhibit. And as I mentioned, it's good projects, much needed projects, reasonable in the sense that it's not going to be that much. Every nickel is too bad on the tax rate, but it's not. It's going to be less than that 1% increase in the tax rate going forward for the next several years.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thanks. So I don't want to get ahead of the presentation here, and if I am, just tell me. But what you're telling me here is that by the time we get to fiscal 2030, or the year 2030, we're going to have existing debt of about 30.3 million. And my question to you is, that's spending 30 million a year. My question to you is, what is the strategy so that at 2030 we stop doing that, and that in fact that number does go down, the 29, 28, 27? How do we get there?
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, and Alderman Clemmons, this is actually the debt service payment, so this is the principal and interest each year. The debt is going to be over several hundreds of millions, so, but the question would be, you know, it's interesting, Treasurer for Debt, I was with him a long time, he'd say, we need a no bonding year. One way of doing it. As the mayor indicated, we have needs between 250 and 300 million. Reducing the amount per year definitely would help drive down these amounts.
So if I could further on that, that what we would have to do is, in theory, change our policy statement to, instead of it being 30 million of new authorized debt year over year, it would have to be adjusted to whatever folks feel comfortable with, 20 million, 25 million, and that's the way you'd start to achieve the decrease in payments.
In other words, don't borrow money.
Well, obviously I understand that, but I guess my question was more of, how do we when we're doing a project, right, we could just raise taxes, right? We don't have to bond it. And I guess, is that the direction that you see us going in? So if we have to raise $30 million, we put it on the backs of the taxpayer instead of bonding it?
It raises the tax rate too much. You know, $30 million project raises the tax rate by 12%. Putting aside the operating budget. One thing that helps, doesn't solve or, you know, completely reach the goal you were looking for, is going to the even principal payments every year helps, because it means the amount, unlike a car payment, you know, it's an even pay.
Right.
A car payment, an even payment for 5 years. If you make even principal payments, the amount for a particular debt goes down from year to year, because let's say you borrow, you know, it's hypothetically 10 million over 10 years. If you make $1 million payment in year one, now you're only paying interest on $9 million. So your total payment in year two is less than year one, and then year three is less than year two. So that helps a little bit. But I think the only answer to really keeping it, if we went to all even, if we got into a situation where all the debt outstanding was even principal payments, and you were in a stable interest environment, you could, if you were borrowing only as much as you paid off the previous year, the budget would remain the same. Correct?
Correct.
See what I'm saying? So that helps a little bit, but we're carrying a lot of debt where we're not making even principal payments. So, you know, some of the big projects, Broad Street Parkway and some of the others, we are, you know, it's not structured that way. So until all that runs out, we're left with the budget's going to go up. The bonded indebtedness, principal and interest, is going to go up if, you know, every time we borrow more money.
I would just make one comment about strategy. I think one of the strategies that this committee may discuss once it starts reviewing the scale of the different projects is that it may be possible for smaller scale projects to potentially utilize a strategy of surplus cash being used to pay for those capital projects, possibly.
Right.
That's one thing that I expect the committee to discuss. There are some small ticket items on this list. And so it's not maybe the large projects, but some of those smaller ones, cash might be an effective solution for that.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, I think we're right. We have to do as little bonding as possible for a year or two. And I think the only things that need to be looked at when we go through this list is which ones are critical to get done that may be a safety issue or public safety issue or could cost us more if we don't do it. And we'd have to go through each one to make that determination. But I do agree that on the smaller projects that we find another way rather than bonding. Because, you know, there are things on the list that are nice to do, but there are some that maybe we should do. But if they're not critical to do, I think we can't do them right now. My opinion.
Can I, Mr. Mayor, if I just?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, John, just to be clear, so looking in column G, I'm seeing 20.8 million, call it 20.9. The next year, I'm seeing 21.5 or 0.6. And so that's the year-over-year increase that we should anticipate, assuming that we are doing a 20-year, 30 million, 4%, correct?
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
that includes the 10 million, if we sell the 10 million
Yep.
at 25 years level debt. That's why, Director Cummings, it's 2.8 instead of the 3.2 in the next four columns.
Yep.
Because it's got that extra payment, or the extra term on the 10 million of the 30.
And then we continue on, and we go from 21.6 to 23.9 to 25.9, almost a $2 million increase year over year.
Correct, that's where you're approaching that 1% on the tax rate, correct.
And that's what I was just gonna ask, so again, just to refresh my memory, for every 2 to 2.5 million.
2.5.
2.5, for every 2.5 million, it's approximately 1% on the tax rate?
Correct.
Okay.
So that's a factor, as I mentioned, of the increase in the debt service, and on the left side, as the mayor indicated, there's probably some payments that would have made if it was level debt, but because we deferred some principal, they're not exacting as far as the extinguishment of debt.
We're extinguishing debt, but the payments don't go down when you're,
Right.
when you structure it a certain way.
Correct, yes.
Because it's not even.
Because we're paying less interest in the early years.
Right.
Right.
We deferred the principal.
So moving on to the final page. This is a chart that basically lists the approved resolutions. At this time, we have 3 approved resolutions that would be general fund, charged to the general fund, and then we have the pending resolution underneath it for the Birch Hill and Maine Dunstable. So at the end of the exercise, it would be, if it's possible, to take the projects and figure out which one should go first, and then fill them in going left to right, such that the bottom line of every single year is 30 million, or no more than 30 million.
Alderman Dowd.
So, although I don't like the title, that 10 million contingency, middle school contingency, I've already stated that we're definitely not going to need 2 million of that. And it's possible much more. We're not there to make that total determination yet. program's not done, obviously. But, you know, that number could be significantly less than that 10 million.
When do you think, when will there be a final answer on that?
I would say probably April, May at the latest.
Okay.
And the 8.5 million, we know that 4.5 million, we already are under contract, the two contractors for that amount of money, so that's not an option. And there's the BDA, which the fire department requires, that we have no option on. And the rest of it is up to what the board wants to approve. The budget committee and the joint special feel that we should complete the project and do the 8.5 million, but I can tell you that based on what we know right now, we won't spend the 8.5 million. There are things that, like the radon mitigation, if that tests out, we don't need to spend that money. You know, when we do the pricing, it's always, you know, conservative, so, but, you know, I'm sure we'll have much more discussion than that particular bond, but.
Can I clarify, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Cummings.
So just, Alderman Dowd, so I understand what you're saying. Under the pending resolutions, I understand the 8.5 is not something that we can look at per se. You're saying there's a potential with the middle school contingency, reducing that at some point, maybe from 10 down to 8 million? Is that?
We know right now we can go from 10 million.
Okay, okay. And that will be, so that doesn't necessarily need to be finalized or April or May. You know, we know that now.
We know right now. And we've already discussed it with Mr. Griffin, right? You can't take that money and transfer it to another project. That's not the way bonding works.
Yep.
But you can plan on not spending it, you're reduced to.
Not borrowing it.
You cannot borrow
Not
it.
borrowing
Right, so.
Well, he hasn't even sold the 10 million.
Right, so in summary, none of the amounts on this worksheet have been sold. So my recommendation is to spend as little of the 10 million that you can. As Alderman Dowd indicates, 2 million looks good. We would only sell the amount that we need, and we would move for the Board of Aldermen to rescind the difference between what's needed and the 10 million. Because that helps us with our authorized but unissued debt counts. And then the 8.5 million, I kicked that out to fiscal '26 because we want to try to figure out what the numbers are at the end of that construction project.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So again, so then, under that scenario, though, I just want to make sure I understood, then Alderman Dowd, you were saying the 16 million, of that 16 million, I missed what you said, so you're saying 8.5 of that?
Which 16 million?
Well, right here, the Elm Street schools and the Birch Hill and Maine Dunstable. Were you saying that that is the one that we could look at?
No,
No.
He's saying the
depending.
what's labeled the contingency, which is 10, is going to go to 8, but it could go lower.
Yep.
And the pending one could go lower.
And the pending one could go lower.
Than the 8.5.
So the pending 8.5 could go lower based on what? That's what I was.
Well, the item that he mentioned was only 25,000, so that's not going to be significant.
So that, I guess, so Alderman Clee, I guess that's my question. So what other things could be potentially reduced of that 8.5? Because I know what something like that costs, but I don't know who's making those decisions.
Alderman Dowd could.
Well,
Yeah.
It's definitely going to come, it's already been approved by the budget committee, it's coming back to the full board. So 4.5 million the city's already committed to. We have contracts signed with vendors, we run out of money in April. And that had to do with the fact that the state screwed up the ESSER funds, and without going into that detail. So we definitely need the 4.5 million. Now,
4.5 million of the 8.5 million?
yes.
That's what I want to know. Okay.
So then you've got 2 million for roofs, if you want to do the roofs. They're leaking now. At some point, you're going to have to do them, whether you do them now or a year or two down the road. That would be a separate bond and it'll cost significantly more.
So this is
We
the
can do them
roofs.
right now for 2 million. In the capital improvements program, they're both in there for 5 million.
So this would be the roofs in the gym that you're talking
Yeah,
about, would make the
roofs-
difference?
Roofs on the whole school.
Yeah. Okay.
These roofs haven't been touched in 30 years.
But I guess it would be a fair question to ask, should those projects be compared to the other projects that we're going through this analysis with?
We're already in the construction process. Things are already moving forward. So there are things like you could not do the fences in the playground. You could take those out, that's 88,000. There's a couple other things that we've already taken out. So the key things, we definitely need the 4.5 million. If you want the roofs to leak, you cannot do the 2 roofs, that's 2 million. The PDA is a fire department requirement, that's like 128K, I think, if I remember it right. We have to do that, that's a code requirement. And there are a couple of other things in the bond that we could not do.
The gym floor or something with the gym?
Well, the gyms have classrooms built into them right now, and they'll rip that all out, and the gym will be basically the way it was pretty much when we started the project. So, you know, those gyms won't be touched probably for another 30 years, unless you have a project downstream. Right now, any of the work that we're doing, Harvey Construction is not charging us any more for their management of those. So they make sure the thing gets done right, so that if you did these projects later, you would have to add all that management cost and other costs. So the cost would be significantly more if you do these things later. So you can do it now at a reasonable price, or you can wait and pay a lot more. That's where we're at.
The bottom line, as I see it, although Alderman Dowd said the 8.5 could be reduced, I don't see it.
That's what I'm
If
trying
the
to
aldermen approve what has been put in front of us, I don't see any significant change to it. The only one we know that's potential is that radon, and that's only 25K.
And some of those prices that we have right now, I'm sure Harvey always gets us the best prices, so there'd be some reduction in prices, so we would, you know, how much we could save in those things is an unknown. But the board can decide, hey, we don't want to do the fences. We don't want to do, there's 2 windows, 2 windows in each school need to be replaced. They're the only windows in the school that aren't being replaced. The frames are falling apart. We did everything in the schools to make it energy efficient. All that hot air is going to go right out the top of those 2 windows. And of course, if they fall in or break, we're going to have to replace them later anyway. Right now, we replace them at much less cost.
Those are really big windows. It's not
Big
just like a
windows.
window like
I was
this.
gonna say, how much are we talking?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
How much
big
are the
windows.
Couple 100,000? Or
I knew you
are they a
asked
million?
No,
Hmm.
that's the one price.
Yeah.
There's 4 windows, 2 in each school.
Yeah.
The frames are falling apart. They leak.
Oh, thanks.
Trust me, we're gonna save every penny we can on that. But as was explained at the meeting, you know, right now, we have the oversight of Harvey and all of their crew, but they're not charging us for this extra work. If you started these projects later, now you're gonna pay for all that management time, which is significant.
All right, well, the bottom line here is that the middle school contingency may be reduced significantly, but in reality, the 8.5 is not going to be materially reduced, right?
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Our goal is to cover the 4.5 million we need for Maine, Dunstable, and Birch Hill with the savings we're making on the McCarthy School. Can't guarantee that right now. I can guarantee 2 million.
All right, so is there any other comments or questions concerning what Mr. Griffin presented? Yes.
So keeping the debt service where you want to keep it, you should be able to identify where we could go on bonded projects if we so desire to go there to keep that level, correct?
Excuse me, if we go with the 30 million a year, given the 4%, this is what the debt service is gonna be, and it's gonna increase from where it is now to 30 million in 2030. I'm sorry, 27 million, right? No, 30 million, so it's gonna increase
But
10
are you saying
million.
that we couldn't do any other bonded projects in that time frame?
He's saying
Not
we
for
could,
general
we
fund.
could do 30 million a year for 5 years, and these would be the payments.
That's right.
So you do 30 million.
If we borrowed nothing, the payments would, you know, decline. If we did nothing for 5 years, it would decline below the 20,884,000, but maybe not all that much. Alderman Clemmons.
Thanks. Is there a breakdown, or do you have a breakdown of what roughly $1 million in bonding costs on that payment service?
Based on.
So it's not, because it
Based on
sounds like
20
30
years,
million
4%.
is about $2 million.
Well, $1 million, if you're on a 25-year even payment schedule, that's 40,000 of principal in year one, plus 40,000 of interest, which is 4% on $1 million. So it's 80,000 in year one. In year two, it would be slightly less. You'd still be paying 40,000 of principal, but you'd be paying now interest on $40,000 less.
So, okay, so
80,000 on a 25-year even principal payment schedule.
But another way of looking at it, Alderman Clemmons, is the 30 million and the out years is 3.27 million in debt service on 30 million. So it's slightly over $1 million.
okay.
The mayor was referring to the 25-year level.
You're talking 25-year schedules, right?
So actually, the only schedule that was on 25 years level debt service was the 10 million for the middle schools.
Oh, okay. Well, 20 years would be, on $1 million, would be 50,000 plus 40, 90,000 in year one.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, maybe that's, okay.
Any other comments or questions on this portion of what we're looking at? All right. I think we can always come back to this. I mean, to discuss any of this at any time later. We have this list of projects. Now, we could spend here's what I was going to ask this question at the end, but maybe I should ask it now. I mean, we can sort of talk through these projects quickly now, just to kind of clarify what they are. But as we go forward, I was going to ask how the committee wished to proceed. We could, I think, with respect to each of these projects, we could, particularly the major ones, we could ask staff or the people on the committee, Mr. Cummings, Mr. Sullivan, Ms. Photo, et cetera, to talk about these projects and tell us the details, or we could ask people to come in and make presentations. For example, if the library wants $30 million, we could ask the library to come in and tell us why. And so my question to the committee is, would you prefer to hear this from, you know, a small group of, you know, a group of staff members that work here in City Hall, or would you prefer to hear this directly from people who are involved in each of these departments and divisions?
I would like to see us go with the people that are involved with the projects. I mean, they can explain to us more clearly what happens if we don't bond them.
Right.
So I think that would be
So you're
my
saying,
preference.
in the example of the library, we have the library come in and tell us about their potential project. Alderman
So
Dow.
one starting point is, I'm on the Capital Improvements Committee. We had our first meeting last night, next one next Monday, assuming no conflicts. And they come and present their projects in detail. And that's a good place to get the information. It's on the website under, Matt?
Capital Improvement Committee.
Yeah, so you can go in and see all the details, or at least the high-level details on those projects that they're asking for. So I think the CIC makes a good place to be a data collection point for these. And the other thing is, I think we ought to look at these projects in phasing and have a 5 to 10 year plan. Some of these may have to be pushed way off. Others may be critical to do now, but is now this year or next year. You know, that's what we need to look at. And the CIC gets all that critical information as to these projects.
So over the next few meetings, we can schedule these various departments to come in and tell us about their projects. DPW, the library, the police department, the fire department, etc. Alderman Govea.
Thank you. A thing I would like to see, and I think getting input directly from the departments is best, but I think more importantly with some of these departments that have multiple projects is a ranking of what they find to be the most critical to their operations and then work our way out. I think that would be important information when we're looking at a scale over a longer period of time is what do you need now, what do you need later kind of thing.
Okay. Alderwoman Clee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Alderman Govea and Alderman Wilshire. I think it's important for them to come. I know when we did the CBDG grants, we did the same thing. We bring everybody in and so on. I think having them prioritize, and the reason that I say have them prioritize is, as he pointed out, is because we're going to sit here and prioritize things, but if it's something is, you know, more important to them, we're not going to just look at the dollar and try to put a priority to it. So I think having each department prioritize gives us some kind of scope and feeling as to what their real need is. And getting back to something that Alderman Dowd said earlier, you know, looking at the safety and things like that, we should also have a kind of a list when we finally start doing things as to what are key elements that make it important, that makes it a priority for us. And even when Alderman Dowd presented us with this main Dunstable, they did the should-haves, the must-haves, the good ideas, and I don't think you put anything, oh, deferred. The other one would be deferred. So there were kind of those 4 levels, which I did appreciate, kind of understanding. So I think in the end, and I'm jumping ahead, but I think that's the way we need to look at things. And there may be something as a must-have that, but it's so expensive we have to put it off for 1 more year or within that 5-year period. But I think that's kind of a good stepping off point.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. So I guess I don't necessarily oppose hearing from departments, but it would have been my preference to actually go the other way, to get an overview of what it is each one of these is, and then I guess get a list from them what they want. But I'm not a detail person. That's probably why I feel that way. The one thing I did want to point out, though, on here that I think needs to be looked at a little bit differently is the Keefe renovations. And I say that because there's a potential there, as was discussed in the past, to do a a TIF on that property, which could potentially pay for part of any bond that might have to go through, and therefore the debt service for that would be reduced over what we would have to take out of this overall for everything else. So what I would like to see is a plan to try to develop that site in a way that can maximize that potential to, with the goal being to renovate the GEF and redevelop that site in a way that earns us enough tax revenue to offset whatever we would have to spend on that property. And I think that that's almost like a carve out, if you will, of this exercise, but it's involved in this exercise because I think it's a worthwhile project, and I think it's something that if we are able to, for example, have a TIF that pays for half of the debt service on that bond, then I think that that goes a long way towards us being able to do that project and to keep that historic piece and important property in this city. So I would like to see that sort of be taken aside. And I know that, and I don't want to put him on the spot, but I know Director Cummings has looked at that in the past. And I'm wondering if we can do an exercise like that and get some fine-tuned numbers in there.
Well, I think the KEEF is, one of the major projects, and it's kind of a complex question, really. Yes, but we could certainly present that kind of information.
If I may,
Yes.
Mr. Mayor. So along the lines of what Alderman Clemens is suggesting, separate and apart from this process, but actually is going to run parallel, is you're going to see a communication from the administration with a resolution. I'm hoping at the next Board of Aldermen meeting, that actually does a lot of what you're talking about, Alderman Clemens, where we're going to be looking for direction from the Board of Aldermen as to how we should move forward with the 9 acres known as the Elm Street Middle School, because it's being turned back to us. And then, we can have the conversation about how we want to release an RFP, how we would like that RFP to be presented, which would help inform, which is really informative for us, so we can have, confident conversations with the private sector market, and also depending on what folks want to do with the Keefe Auditorium will really dictate the development plan that we will see and how many units we could potentially see on the site, and what folks want to do with the future tax revenue with that money, obviously is a conversation to be had. But I wanted to bring this out explicitly because I think it's a little bit more than just the exercise you're talking about, but it's really about what the development plan is for the 9 acres of that land, which, again, my goal is to try to have that before the Board of Aldermen in parallel with this.
I mean, one thing that certainly we've been preparing for is that even with Keefe renovations early on or down the road a little bit on our schedule, obviously the groups that use this the most, or who use this, beyond the schools, the symphony and the actor-singers, would not have a place for some period of time. Even if we embark today on those renovations, I mean, they probably wouldn't be done for 2 years, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked with the Performing Arts Center and with these groups about, or the National Center for the Arts, about how they could use that facility for their performances for at least a temporary period of time, and how we might have to provide some level of subsidy to make that possible. But kind of the details haven't been worked out, but at least in the interim, we need to find, or I believe we need to find, a location for those community groups, arts groups to perform. And, I mean, to some extent, some of their people would prefer to move, but not all of them. So, we'll see. But Anyway, I mean, that's a bigger subject. Yes, Alderman
Yeah,
Clemens.
it's more to the point of the debt service, because I know that, you know, hopefully the board has an appetite to look into doing such a thing that I had proposed here, which is to put that 9 acres on a TIF and, again, pay a bond towards paying back any renovations that we do towards that building. Whatever that number ends up being, we can take out of this, and that means we can do more over here on this side of the ledger. So that's really the point that I'm trying to make, and an important part of that conversation is the fact that it also allows us to do the renovations that we need to do on the Keefe as well, right? So rather than saying we have more important priorities over here, it allows us to balance and do both.
Another project that could present some unique aspects is the Public Works Garage, because the Conway people, and we need to nail this down further, but the Conway people are saying that if we move from Riverside, that is the Public Works Department, they will build another, with their own money, they will build another second rink.
Arena.
Yeah, I think
And there would be
two
some
sheets, right?
additional land. So that's a kind of an additional carrot for that project.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Cummings.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. What I was going to suggest is, I would like to walk you through this sheet and give you the genesis and the orientation of it. I think it might address some of the comments made by Alderman Clemens, and it just kind of gives a little bit of a ground playing field for us to then advance the conversation, because I want to make sure folks understand how we arrived at this document.
So why don't we will schedule the presentations for people to come in and talk about the various projects, at least maybe not the real small ones, but we'll do the best we can with that. But why doesn't Mr. Cummings go through these? There's been some work put into this list. I mean, these aren't just total guesses. We've talked to the departments about these things. Yes, Alderman Down.
And I think it's a good idea for them to come in and speak, but if you want to get background information so you can ask more pointed questions, all that information on most of these projects is in that database that I was telling you about from capital improvements. All the police, fire, all those things are in there in some kind of detail. So then when they come in, you'd have a better starting point to ask questions.
All right, so Alderman Govea.
I just have a quick thought going back to what we talked about before we really dive into these. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, probably 5 different projects that I could see us funding through surplus funds instead of going through a bonding process. And I think that's something we really should be taking a look at. I've gone back and forth on how we've spent surplus funds in the past, and usually what tells me no and what it gets me to vote no on them is when we are using surplus funds for things that have costs that go outside of one fiscal year. Surplus funds to me should be used for exactly what some of these are: voting machine equipment, pool epoxy, things that can be used for multiple years at a time. They're projects that will advance the city with some leftover money that we have. So I think there's some really good opportunity to be able to punch out at least quite a few of these projects, if not a good chunk, with the right use of surplus funds, depending on what's available at the end of each fiscal year.
Okay. All right, Mr. Cummings?
Yes, thank you, and Alderman Govea stole some of my thunder, because that was going to be one of the points that I was going to hit on. So, but before I get there, so what you have is a sheet before you that was developed in concert with the department heads in I want to say January-ish time frame. Started in December, carried on in through January, where Director Sullivan, myself, CFO Griffin, Meg Karen, we met with every single director, chief, department head, and we used the CIC report as our basis for that conversation. And so we used the CIC for the launching pad for the discussion that we had. And then what we did was we framed the conversation with the department head and the directors, saying, what are your priorities over the next 5 years? And how would you like to see capital projects funded over just that horizon or that time period? And so that is how this list before you was developed and arrived at. And then what I want to make explicitly clear is we still need to understand the schools and the schools' needs. That's evolving. We also still need to understand that the numbers that are set here are going to evolve and change, but we wanted to get some sort of understanding of what the magnitude of cost could be, but we still need to vet out some of these numbers. And then some of these projects could be funded through various alternative funding sources. We didn't want to take some of these conversations away from you all. What the appropriate number is to carry in the plan, I'll give you a good example. The DPW garages, I'm carrying 30 million here, but upon additional research and discovery, my recommendation is, something more around $40 million. And that's something that I would point out to you is probably a more accurate number. But we didn't want to necessarily do that without having a conversation with you all first. But then in addition to that, there may be ways for us to fund some of these projects, not through the debt service. And so I heard comments at the last Board of Aldermen meeting is, what's the difference between this group and the CIP and the CIC committee? And the one thing that really doesn't occur at the CIP level is they give you a grade and they tell you how things stand from their perspective, but they don't compare it to the other projects that then need to fit into our debt service plan with the limited available capacity that we have to fund projects. So what I'm hoping that will occur over the next few weeks is a conversation about voting machines. The voting machines is probably a good one where we could look towards surplus to use, so we don't necessarily need to cue it into our debt service plan. But again, didn't want to take that conversation away from you all because, we recognized it as in the CIP, and so we wanted to kind of present it. It's definitely needed within the 5-year horizon.
Can I interrupt you real quick? On the voting machines, I believe that we have, if Mr. Healy is correct, I believe we have that 100,000 already earmarked.
This is in addition to that.
This is in addition to that?
I clarified that with him.
Oh, okay.
Yep, because to Alderman Clement's point, we actually funded some machines already, but it wasn't everything to get it done like the way the clerk needs to be compliant, and so he's looking for an additional $75,000 to $100,000.
Okay.
So again, so I'm hoping we can have that conversation, and then what I'm also hoping for is looking at the CIP for longer range term planning, beyond the 5 years, so we can start queuing things in to our plan as they move forward. And then this group, which are the policymakers for the city, can then really have the conversation about which projects should be prioritized and actually funded. I guess the last comment I'll make is you'll see another column on the right-hand side. These are all the projects that we're aware of that weren't necessarily department head driven, but nonetheless projects that are going to be a capital request in some sort of way that we need to be aware of and have a conversation about how we may want to fund some of those things. As a case in point, you have Riverside Drive athletic fields. We know that there's a need for more soccer fields in the city. We believe that that could happen now or next 5 years or between 5 and 10 years. We wanted to just recognize that, make sure what we tried to do is capture all the capital expenditures that we're aware of that could be on that 5-year horizon. So then the priorities could be kind of laid out in a way so folks can anticipate and compare against the other projects.
Just real quick, one that's missing on this, the Board of Education just forwarded to the Joint Special, we haven't seen it yet, the redo of the field at Stella Stadium. So that's not on here.
I want to say all the schools, we actually need to have a conversation about how we are going to
Yes.
handle schools, period, and then it needs to match up with this.
So you need to bring Mr. Smith in, and we have no short-term plans for, other than Stella's, which we haven't accepted yet, and I don't think I'd accept it unless this committee accepts it, but we don't have any short-term plans in the next year or two for any school projects. But the only thing he has in front of him is a study for the 20 buildings that they own as to what's needed and when. So that would be downstream, and if he gets the money for that, then you'd have a much better idea of what and when.
And some of that, Alderman Dowd, if I may, Mayor?
Yes.
Is really a conversation about deferred capital maintenance, and maybe some of that needs to be handled differently and not necessarily part of the debt service plan. So, you know, and I'll leave that conversation for another night, but really the biggest difference between what we're doing here and what the CIC does is we're trying to match up our capital expenditure needs with what we believe our debt service plan is going to be over the next few years. And so anyway, Mr. Mayor, I mean, I wanted to kind of give that overview.
All right, now can I add one thing? Which is, in all projects, we should look for outside funds where we can find them.
Right.
Grants, you know, tax credits, whatever we can get to help incentivize and reduce the cost, which of course I think is across the board point on every project. But, and there may be places where some of these projects we can at least get some help.
And to that point, Mr. Mayor, the generator project, our emergency manager director has suggested that there's a lot of federal money, FEMA money, that could help with that resiliency and sustainability initiative.
All right, so why don't you go ahead and address the projects.
Excellent, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So first on the list, and this is in no particular order, but it is basically a representation of the 3 priorities, if you will, over a 5-year horizon. Starting with police, it's the 9 Riverside building conversion to an education training facility. We're carrying $3.5 million for that project. Next is the police station parking lot, and I think this is a good example of how some of these numbers are going to change. When this conversation first started, it was, you know, understood to be a repaving project, but as further study and investigation went along, it was clear that it's much more than a repaving project. They need to address some water issues where the water is pooling in certain areas of the parking lot that is causing some significant damage, according to the police team. So this project is more like a $1.5 million project.
Yeah, I've been involved with that with the police department, so it is going to be more of a project. And the first thing they're going to have to do short-term is do an engineering analysis of their parking. They have one drainage basin in the entire parking lot, and it's not a simple project, but the study's going to be one side or the other, 200K. I think that has to be done before we'll know exactly what this may cost, and probably not the same time as the building.
And then lastly, Mr. Mayor, cell block booking area, this is, as I understand it, to maintain their accreditation. This cell block booking area needs some to be addressed to bring it up to current industry best practices. They don't really have a good solid number yet on it. It would need the same type thing that Alderman Dowd just represented, which is, you know, some preliminary investigation design. We're holding about $2 million right now just to have an understanding of the order of magnitude of this potential project. The next is the public health building. And so, and this is something I'm going to raise as a policy matter I want to put out before the body, which is the public health has represented that the city is in need of a capital expenditure of a low barrier shelter / transitional housing, and we're suggesting, based on the amount of beds necessary, as $5 million. Now, there has been no discussion to date where I have seen the policymakers indicate an interest in pursuing this additional service that the city of Nashua would be providing. And I'm not suggesting that there isn't an interest, but for this to proceed through a process, I'm making a policy point. There should be an upfront conversation that occurs before this gains access to this plan or to the CIC, which could be in later years. But I wanted to just kind of point this out there as something that for consideration moving forward, you may want to have a discussion about process on how you handle new expenditures where there's an increase in service delivery, where a new capital asset may be required. There's other examples. This is just the first one, so I wanted to kind of hit upon that. But nonetheless, in speaking with Director Bagley, we are all well aware of the unhoused issue. It's currently what we're going to need to satisfy that issue, according to Director Bagley, is approximately 75 beds, give or take. And we're thinking that is a potential project of about $5 million. Next, we have the fire department. The fire department, first, everyone should be aware of, they're going out for a condition building and grounds facility assessment right now. They have an RFP that was issued. They're selecting a vendor. They're doing that in-depth analysis that it sounds like Sean Smith may have done over at the schools. And so they're going to be coming over the next few years with a list and with some better information that they currently have right now. But what they've preliminarily identified a need for is the Amherst Street floor, Conant Road roof, and then what they were calling a replacement of the Pine Hill Road, or quote-unquote airport station number 5. And that's a complete replacement of the existing facility. These capital expenditure are envisioned to occur in their ideal world somewhere over the next 5 years. Next, you have the library. The library has 2 projects, but one of the projects may not be necessary depending on what the body would want to do. So first and foremost is the masonry and windows rehabilitation. This is to preserve the building as best it can, and that's in lieu of anything occurring in terms of a renovation. But if the body elected to do the renovation project, instead of that $3 million, you'd be looking at about a $25 million project. But again, this is a good example of the library went out, and I believe they've come before you and provided you a briefing, and that briefing indicated there was a study done, and that study provided 2 or 3 options, but there hasn't been clear policy guidance given as to which option to pursue. And so right now I'm representing the $25 million here based off of conversations with Director McCormick, but that's probably a conversation that still needs to be had. Next is the clerk's office. Again, $100,000 for the voting machines being set aside. That's their only deferred capital maintenance or capital request. It's in the CIC. We didn't want to take it away. We want to be transparent, but nonetheless, I think we could recommend other funding sources for that. It doesn't necessarily need to be in the debt service plan. Emergency management is a generator project. They're working through the right numbers right now, but essentially what it would be is a generator for every asset, and particularly critical infrastructure that is here in the city. So if there was a major catastrophe, we could keep our core services up and running. Case in point, and might be a recommended best practice that anytime you do a new building project, this be incorporated as part of a base building condition. So you incorporate it into the GMP early on. That's something that we did with the new DPW office building. So it was a generator was included as part of the office building's construction. But if that is not decided, then what we need to make folks aware of is there's a need to get some of our buildings that don't currently have generators on a program that would allow them to continue providing services. Economic development, there is a few issues and projects here that need to be addressed, but the big one is the garages. with a public safety issue relative to maintaining both the High and the Elm Street garage combined would be about $15 million. Then there's some downtown placemaking initiatives that would be, 3-ish projects, which in the aggregate total $1 million. Then there's the Bidda property project, which again suggesting to be about $1 million may be necessary. And then the wayfinding project of, again, about $1 million being necessary for the various economic development initiatives. I have Director Photo here. She can certainly speak to these, but we had a conversation about the DPW garage. We're carrying $30 million because that's what we've publicly discussed previously. Upon further investigation, I think there's a conversation that needs to be had to adjust that number, but nonetheless wanted to just try to stay as consistent as possible for right now. Greeley Park for $1.3 million. That would include a stonehouse roof, bathrooms, wading pool, and band shell. Holman Stadium at $7 million.
What about Greeley Park? Is that the Stonehouse? Does that include the Stonehouse?
That is the roof explicitly.
The roof and the bathroom.
And the bathrooms.
I thought that was $1 million on its own.
It is.
And then the wading pool and
All
band
right,
shell.
so those other things are small. Okay.
And then Holman Stadium, we're carrying $7 million, which would be, the scope could be potentially field lighting, HVAC, fire protection, seating, renovation of the facility. That could be concessions and whatnot. Lights and various miscellaneous needs for that $7 million. Director Photo, always being a wonderful advocate, included a few others beyond the 3. Again, this is in no particular order, but we got more than 3 from Director Photo. Paving program needing to continue, and then the pool and decking that needs to needs key attention over the next 5 years.
Tim, can I just clarify one thing? The truck wash bays probably should be under Public Works.
So, can I clarify on that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
so I kept the truck, so what Director Photo is talking about is there's 1.5 being carried over the truck wash bay, but that truck wash bay for 1.5 million is not representative of the 30 million based off of conversations I had with Harvey when they were developing some numbers. So I think we could probably include that in if we were to adjust this number to $40-ish million. It would definitely be included then.
And also to clarify, there are a number of other departments, including police and fire, who are really interested in the truck wash because they would be able to utilize it as well.
They would be able to take advantage of it. Again, continuing on community development, I'm going to speak for Director Sullivan right now, but he's here to clarify. We have hydro improvements, which is specifically a fish passage, and as I understand it, that is a statutory or a regulatory requirement. That's $7.5 million of deferred capital maintenance for our hydro. Dams, we have Quadrant 1 implementation of the Riverfront Plan for $250,000. I believe that is design services. We have community rail extension design. So what that means is to finish the 30% design to get us to qualify for federal funding. We are going to need additional monies beyond the monies we've already entered into for a contract with AECOM to finish the study. That could happen sometime over the next 5-year horizon. So Director Sullivan wanted to carry that $1.5 million. Mohawk Tannery Pedestrian Bridge is something that we wanted to represent to you all. It's something that has been talked about, and that is the idea of connecting Mine Falls Park to the redeveloped site of the Mohawk Tannery. We know that that's going to be about a $3 million cost, that the developer will do the construction. We would have to reimburse them for that, very similar to what we did with the School Street parking lot when they built that garage for $2.5 million. We reimbursed them for those costs. This was always, as I understand it, a goal or intention as far back as to the zoning back in the early 80s. So we wanted to make sure that that was represented to you all, so you are aware of it, and it would be something that would be necessary sometime over the next 5 years. And then, again, the Mill-Yard Dog Park for $1.5 million is something that Community Development wanted to carry in. And Director Sullivan, being just like Director Photo, did not state it the 3 priorities, but that's because they're wonderful advocates. And then admin services, we have an HVAC mechanical issue here in City Hall that is critical. We know we need to do that. We're carrying $1 million for that. We have general City Hall renovations that need to occur. Those are not as critical per se, but we wanted to carry something over the next 5 years to continue making improvements to City Hall, particularly ADA access to the building. Mobile device management for $100,000 is a capital request that IT has had. And then Lawson is set to, that is our internal accounting of records and bookkeeping, and it helps manage our finances. That software system is due to expire in 2029, and we're gonna need to have a conversation of whether we stay with Lawson and upgrade because they're no longer gonna service that product, or whether we change to a different product. But nonetheless, we need to carry about $1 million.
So administrative services didn't state a 3 priorities
Correct.
I'm
either.
glad you say it.
Thank you,
I was
Mayor.
going to say, can't even follow his own directions.
Can't even follow his own directions.
The City Hall renovations, do those include elevators?
That would be non-critical elevators, bathrooms, ADA access. Then, so moving over now, Mayor, to the second column. So just again, these are just conversations that I think all the various directors have heard or we've seen represented in the CIC, but we wanted to kind of memorialize them in some way so folks knew about them, so you could keep them in the forefront of your mind. We already discussed the truck wash bay. We've already kind of discussed the generator project. The Keefe renovations we've already sort of discussed. The School Street contingency, at the time when we developed this, it wasn't very clear as to what was going to be necessary, but I believe that's already memorialized in the debt service bonding plan. A new fire station, so this would be an additional fire station. This additional fire station would be what would be referred to as station number 7. This doesn't necessarily have to occur in the next 5 years, according to the chief, but according to their master plan that they did a couple years ago, there is a need for a couple more fire stations in the city, and depending on where it gets done, would necessitate whether we do this one first or within the 5 years or not. If you were to do the Airport Road rehabilitation, which would be an expansion of their current site, the fire department believes that they would have adequate coverage to not necessarily need a new station in that 5-year horizon and still make the response times that they're looking to make. Senior center renovations. So we own the senior center. It's under a lease. We know that the senior center roof in particular is going to need to be done, but there's other issues with the building. So we wanted to carry something for that. Along with the athletic fields, as we understand it, there is an ambition to do more soccer fields in particular in the city. We wanted to carry something for that. Court Street. So with all this conversation about the Keefe Auditorium, I did not want to neglect the fact that we also have the Court Street Auditorium, the Court Street building with the Streeter Theater. And so previously it had been discussed $7.5 million for that project. Next, we have fiber loops. So this is an IT issue where we're going to need to do some fiber connectivity to maintain our network. That is nothing that needs to be done over a 5-year period, but it is something that we're going to need to be aware of, an expense coming down the horizon. Then finally, not really sure what we're doing with the Mount Pleasant schools, but we wanted to make everyone aware of there's a potential $25 million cost, again, in an effort just to be transparent. Then the next item is a column of transportation projects that the city is endeavoring to do. A lot of these projects have a state match, and so there's an 80-20 split. Not everything on this list would be that per se, But we wanted to capture some of these transportation projects that we believe we've heard are a priority in the city, and we may have a financial obligation too. So the Walnut Street Oval at $750,000, the West Pearl Street at $2 million, the Heritage Trail East at $300,000, Factory Street sidewalks and Factory Streets in general, $1 million. West Hollis Street is, I believe, a design at $300,000, and then Main Street, the development and conversion of that transformative project of Main Street of $30 million. So these numbers are all subject to change as more study is done with them, but we wanted to put a order of magnitude out there for folks so you can start to understand the various needs that we have and the associated expenses that go along with it, and show you how that matches up with our, what I'm going to say is an approximate $120 million to work with over the next 5 years. So that's another way for you all to look at this. So you have essentially $120-ish million to try to prioritize various projects.
Alderwoman Cleed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Cummings, the Mohawk Tannery pedestrian bridge, I guess maybe I missed a meeting or slept through something. I didn't realize that we were actually paying them back like we do with the School Street. Is that a TIF area? Would this fall within that?
It's not in the current TIF.
It's not in,
correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, this would be an obligation of us, and it's always been contemplated to be that way.
Right. Then this might be out of the scope of this meeting, but when we're doing that, that pedestrian bridge, which I absolutely love, will there be parking area there that the average people, or is it just going to be walk to the neighborhood to get to through that? And the reason I ask is I had a constituent who said, if we're building this bridge, which I said, oh, we're not paying for it. I've had to send her a message going, stay tuned, I was wrong. She asked, is it just going to be for the neighbors to be able to walk through, or is there going to be a parking lot on their property? Because truth be told, while I really like that, if it's just going to be something that certain people are going to be able to walk to, maybe we don't want to do it. So,
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes,
The
Matt.
intent and the current master concept plan that the board adopted actually included a public parking area and public easements for folks to be able to traverse the tannery site to access a public parking area that will service not only the pedestrian bridge, but also the planned public kayak launch that will be on site as well. And so certainly an outstanding question about whether the amount of parking being provided is adequate. But we certainly know that there'll be a need and an interest to have public parking right there for folks wanting to access Mine Falls.
thank you.
We're talking limited parking. We're not talking about like Walmart parking.
Right. No, I know.
Alderman Dowd.
Yes, on some of these projects, like the parking garages, and I assume these prices are the full renovation, but on all of these projects, we might have to look at, because of timing and cost, phasing. So you may have certain things that are really high priority on those garages that you do hypothetically in 25, but you can push something off till 26. Same thing with other projects. I know we talked about the DPW garage, you know, there's the basic garage is X. There may be things you want to add to it later, but you could fund that downstream. So, I mean, we have to look at these projects as to what's critical, what do we have to do, when can we do it, and do we want to phase things in?
Mr. Mayor, if I may?
Yes, go ahead.
So I agree with that sentiment to a point, and really, and we internally, we discussed this, and so to answer your question, Alderman Dowd, these are total project costs. And because what we're really trying to tease out is what are the projects we're really committed to? Because we also don't want to represent to you all that we're going to do a phased approach and spend taxpayer money on a design when, one, there really isn't an intention to do the project because I don't want to waste taxpayers' money. But then, two, we know that that design is only going to be valid for a certain period of time with an associated cost to it. And so what we know is we're going to need to ensure that that design gets updated the further out we push out the construction of that project. So we wanted to kind of tease out at first what the priority projects are. And once we understand that, I actually think we're going to do exactly as you suggest, Alderman Dowd, which is we will look to phase the projects that we believe there's a commitment to, so that way we're being as diligent as we can with the taxpayer money.
Yeah, I think the first thing we need to do is prioritize all these projects and see which ones get done in 25, 26, 27, 28. And I assume that's what you want to do, Mayor.
Yes.
So, and I think we need to sort of look at the whole process. We've talked about this committee, the Capital Improvements Committee, the Budget Committee. I think they all need to play hand in hand so that we're working together, so that when it comes to the budget, that, you know, Mayor, you've already worked with the Budget Committee and saying this is the projects from this committee that we're going to do this year. That's in the budget. So, but I think if we don't tie all those things together, we've got a lot of people operating in the shadows.
All right, any other comments or thoughts, questions about the project discussion, the initial preliminary project discussion?
Just a quick one.
Alderwoman Clee.
Yeah, this is just kind of quick, and it was something that was brought up before when we look at projects. Is there any way to know, once we tease out what the priorities are, any of the others that are left behind, or perhaps maybe something we want to leave behind, that would have a potential grant to it? For instance, when I'm looking at the public health one, is there a potential grant? I mean, this is an issue throughout the state. Is the state willing to maybe come up with some? I mean, so if we did, and I agreed I heard what you said before about the, you know, we have to look at what the process was, what's actually been approved that the city wants to go forward in doing. This may not be one of those things, but,
So I'm going to take a stab at answering that, but
Okay.
then I'm going to hand it off to Director Sullivan as well.
Okay.
But, so part of this is also, we need direction from you all as to whether, because we have limited time and we have limited resources, and so, you know, I need the guidance as to understand that this is a priority, so we can then say, this is the funding plan we can put towards it. You know, the Performing Arts Center, I think, is a good example. We cobbled together many sources of funds over a 5-year period, but it was very clear that that was a priority project. So similar to whether it's the library, Keefe, this shelter, whatever it may be, I think if staff had that direction, we would then be able to say with some confidence, you'll be able to find capital grants very easily, but you need to then recognize there's an operational cost that may go along with this, and you need to associate that and plan for it. But we haven't even had those conversations yet. But I'll leave my comments there and hand it off to Director Sullivan.
No, I think Director Cummings covered it. I mean, what I would say is that when the departments come here to make their presentations on their projects, I think the guidance that we'll provide them with staff is that they should be prepared to talk about other funding sources that might be available to support their work. Speaking only for myself, because those are the projects that I understand, nearly all of them have some potential grant funding or other funding that could be used, at least as a portion of the total project cost. Now, to Director Cummings' point, I'm not sure how to mobilize my resources in all cases, which project I should be focusing on. That's why I'm looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have here, so I know where to pick my spots. But all of the departments and divisions that have submitted, they have a sense of whether or not their grant money's out there, because they're looking constantly to get a leg up and trying to get these projects done as expeditiously as possible. And so we'll ask them to at least present what those other funding sources might be when they come forward before this committee.
Mayor?
Yeah.
To me, that is actually really important, because if I were looking at two projects that I say I really like both of them, but if I know if we approve one and there are potential alternate funding sources, that might get priority because those funding sources are going to dry up. If you understand what I'm trying to say. So if we know there's a potential, even if we don't know guarantee, it may help us to want to fund it so that we can take advantage of any monies, grant monies or something. I mean, I put a big question mark whether or not we would do that public health one, but possible grant money, if the state says this is something we really need and we'll do an 80-20, not that they would, but we do an 80-20, that could possibly bubble up to the top because we don't want to lose that money is.
Well, and I'll pick just quickly on one of my own projects, and I hope that's okay. You know, the Mill Yard Dog Park, and I know it's one that's near and dear to your heart, is one that for all basic objective measures of what's a critical project to the city, that might not check all those boxes. But in the event that we were to put together some public-private partnership, seek grant funding, whether it's resilience funding or dog park funding, that could completely change. And so I'm certainly well aware of that, and I think that the other department heads are as well. For some of the projects that may not objectively rise to the top of the list, they're working hard to try and find other sources to jump it up.
Thanks. Thank you.
President Wilshire.
I'm really interested in the public health shelter. Good and bad. You know, what happens when this is built? Who operates that? City? I mean, we're not in the housing business.
I think the idea is the city would operate it. I mean, the proposal is that the proposal being made by public health is the city would operate it. Although it's really conceptual in nature. I mean, it's very preliminary, but that is their concept.
Okay.
Mayor?
Yes,
Yeah,
Alderman
so
Down.
I think we have some basic guidelines that, based on the numbers that Mr. Griffin gave us, as to our bounds. And at some point, we're gonna put together a plan that says when we're gonna try and address these things. But it can't be cast in concrete, because things change. So it has to be a little bit fluid. We may have things come up that, oh my God, we gotta bond this now because something catastrophic happened. Or we may have things that get the funding and whoop, we don't need to bond it, we get money from another source. So it has to have some flexibility.
So, if I may just quickly,
Yes.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr.
I
Sullivan.
promise not to prolong the meeting, but we're certainly talking about that. And you mentioned the role of the Budget Review Committee, the CIP, and this ad hoc group. Certainly, I think that we'll develop a product at the end of this process, but I think there should be a conversation about how those three groups work together, maybe longer term. It's possible that next year the priorities could change, or even during the course of the next 6 months. And so I'm not sure if this committee survives or how exactly that will be handled, but certainly there'll be a need to make sure that this thing is dynamic and changes as grant funds and other things become available. And I think we've got to do some more work to figure out how exactly that works.
But sorry, Mr. Mayor, but the one thing that I really.
Ben is really anxious.
That's okay.
here.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to get sorry.
But you keep interrupting.
I do. I apologize.
Go ahead.
And I'm sorry, Alderman Clemens.
He's young.
The one thing
You're
that I
getting
want to
older by the
stress, the one thing I want to stress that I really hope that this group can take away from is we need to agree on the $30 million a year over year. The projects can change and be dynamic, but if we can agree to that $30 million is really going to be the critical policy guidance that we're going to be looking for as we move on.
Alderman Clemens.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I agree that part of the thing that we need to understand is what the ongoing cost is going to be in relation to some of these. And for example, if you're talking about the city taking on being in the business of running a shelter versus which would be an entirely new thing with an entirely new department, a new building to maintain, et cetera, versus you look at the fire department's needs. Well, eventually they're going to need a new fire department at some point, right? And so that's the similar thing, right? Because you're going to need to employ all of the people that staff the fire department, et cetera. But I think the difference there is that, and as was mentioned by Mr. Cummings, was that if they can build the airport or renovate the airport station, right, and add on to that and add staff to that, as opposed to building a new fire station, somewhere else, then perhaps when you're looking at these priorities, that's in the next 5 years, right? Versus, and you can put off the new fire station because we're going to add to the staff, we're going to add to that. The other thing, that I think is important to look at, in addition to what do each one of these things bring in cost, is what is the cost if we don't do them? So in other words, if we don't get done the Elm Street garages, for example, or the High Street and Elm Street garage, what happens down the road? How critical are they? Do they fall down in 10 years on somebody who's parking there? You know, and that I think is versus, let's say, you know, I don't know, replacing the entire library, you know. And so I look at those things, and I think and I hope that this committee will look at that, because I really think that there are priorities in here that I think we need to, there should be a lot of factors that go into what is decided. So I'm looking forward to doing this. And I think part of it needs to be a discussion of what is absolutely critical, and also what is important to the, you know, the future of our city.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I may, oh, sorry.
Alderwoman Clee.
Yeah, it's just a quick question. I want to add on to what Alderman Clemmons, I agree 100% what he said, but I'd also like to look at things such as, I'll bring up a really large one, the DPW garage. If we didn't do the DPW garage, what is the cost to what we have, the equipment that we have, and so on? And I'd like to take all those into consideration. I'm not saying we would or we wouldn't, but what is the potential loss to the city on equipment or anything else like that? I did talk to Director Photo, and she made a comment that we've got a little rodent problem eating the harnesses of, I know it happened to her own car too, but eating the harnesses within the vehicles, which is starting to cost us a lot of money, something like dry rot. So I'd like to look at some of those too. So when the these departments come in front of us, I'd like to know kind of what just Alderman Clement said. What is the cost to the city if we don't do it? What is the cost to the city if we do it for ongoing operational costs and so on? And I know they may not be able to come up with that right away, but I think we need to look at that to help us prioritize what we really can do.
Mr. Clemmons.
Thank you.
Cummings, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Clemmons, Cummings, I don't know.
So that was part of what I was going to say, which is relative to the, extending the useful life of some of our assets. There's a value there. There's also the operational efficiencies that may occur with the DPW garage. There's a value there when we're really bringing everyone into one area, and from a management perspective, those are some really good values and variables that we should also be measuring. So it's just not public safety and critical assets for this assessment. Also, another one I wanted to put out there is, and I think Alderman Clemmons was touching upon a little bit, but projects that could be transformational for the community. And so, that may be Main Street, and redeveloping Main Street could raise the property values of all the surrounding properties, which will make the community more wealthier. Some of the placemaking that's been suggested by Director Hannum, although at first look at it, you may say this doesn't rise to the level of critical, but if you take it to a secondary level of thought and you have a conversation with Director Hannum, you may find that, there's tremendous value in doing some of what I call transformational
One thing there
projects.
could be the BIDA project. They want to use money to develop a couple of tracks in the mill yard. Well, that'll bring in a lot of tax money, residents, downtown, I don't know if they need $1 million, but there are projects that could bring in additional benefits. Mr. Griffin.
Mr. Mayor, just some thoughts here as I'm listening. It would be great to know at the end of the budget season what we're going to actually try to authorize in fiscal '25. For those of us who live in towns and other locations, they have one shot at it. They have what's called a town meeting. They don't have the ability that we have where we can do a bond authorization in January or February or March. So knowing that is going to provide a lot of benefits for the calls that we have with the rating agencies. So that's number one. Number two, when the mayor and I, we kind of were like, you got to be kidding me. We put 40 million out, and in 2030, that's 37 million. I raised this point with the two directors, Sullivan and Cummings. We've got to figure out a way to meet the demands of the deferred maintenance. So the question is, we could bond 40 million a year, run up the debt service to 37 million. But as I say, we can change the oil, we can build a new school, but we can't do anything in between. So I think we have to have a serious discussion on that deferred maintenance. How it's worked in the past, CIC, you bring the project in, and then on page 150, we have $1 million of capital projects. And what we've been doing with surplus is if we bring projects forward, we try to eliminate bringing forward operating costs, but we got to come up with a plan there. Otherwise, we're going to end up with deferred maintenance. I mean, we've talked about 100,000 for the school, 20-something buildings, right? Yeah. 50,000 for the fire department with 8 buildings. So I'm just thinking out loud here that if we could kind of bring that capital improvement dollar value up, knowing that we're giving back with the debt service, it might get us there. Now, you can't do one fell swoop saying we're going to put 10 million in for deferred maintenance. You got a hell of it. You got 5% tax rate right there, but you're going to have a low tax rate the next year. You don't want to do that, so you got to build that part of it too. So we look in the budget. That's where the budget committee is, so we can talk about the progress and the programs and get that done there. So the ad hoc, CIC, and budget committees is a place for all of us to work together. Thank you.
All right, well, it doesn't look like anybody has too much additional, but our mission will be to work with the various departments, divisions, to bring them in based upon their availability, and then get more detail regarding the various projects. Mr. Cummings.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just hoping we might be able to talk about the cadence of the meetings here and see if we can see what the availability is.
Meaning how often we would meet?
How often we would meet. I mean, I'm going to suggest at least every other week, maybe even weekly, but whatever we may need to do to make the timeline as CFO Griffin has outlined. But I would like to, if I could, Mr. Mayor, reserve the auditorium for our next meeting. And then I'd like to communicate, to the various departments to have them come in and develop a schedule. So I'm hoping to get some understanding as what the expectations might be.
Well, at least every other Tuesday and the offsetting Tuesdays to the Board of Aldermen, right? So like tonight, we have a meeting, and the board has a meeting in a week and had one last week. Now, can we do more than that? I don't know. That's up to you to try to figure out if more meetings are really, if people are available and more meeting nights are available.
Okay, will do.
All right, but I'd say, that at least we can do every other Tuesday, maybe more often, here and there.
And I would look to 6:30-ish time frame,
Yes,
does that work?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Great.
Make sure I have infrastructure.
Wednesday. So
Yeah, Tuesdays are PEDC.
So Tuesdays would be BE's, and I'll check to make
So
sure
the
that
one after the next Board of Aldermen will be a PEDC.
PEDC.
Yeah.
Well, we'll work on this.
So, but I'll look to develop that.
So
And
2 weeks from tonight is PEDC.
Yeah, I think so.
we'll,
Yeah, PEDC.
Okay. All right, well, is there anyone here on PEDC? No, half the committee, okay. All right, so we'll work on the scheduling, look at the various meeting nights and try to.
There might not be anything on that agenda, I don't know.
All right, anyway, President Wilshire.
Thank you. I
Outdoor
just want to
dining.
say, this is going to be great. I'm looking forward to this process, and thank you. I think this is really going to benefit the city.
And I was calling on you also for the honor of the adjournment.
Oh. Okay, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and the meeting is adjourned at 8:14 PM.